Dylan got it bumping.
What's
What's
up?
up,
What's up?
man?
Hey, bro.
How are you?
I am good, man. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me on, bro.
Of course. Where are you? Where are you at right now?
I am in my basement in my in my little home studio here, bro. So we don't have the beauty of the nice Southern California weather. So,
No,
we're down here. It's raining today. So yeah, man, inside hanging out in St. Louis, Missouri.
that's awesome. That's awesome, man. Yeah, I'm in my
Yeah.
garage. It looks really fancy here, but then you just turn around, bro. It's just a normal garage. My wife
Right.
today, she came and she goes, "Man, people have no idea. It looks so fancy, but it's really. I got a little kind of couch set up, and then I got a prophetic gym on the other side that I haven't used yet.
See, that's
So
it, bro. In COVID, everybody's a set director. Like everybody's building
true.
sets and becoming producers. So,
It's
but
true, man. I was saying to my guys, like, we don't got pulpits, but we got phones,
hey, there
you
we
know?
go.
So, well, man, I'm so excited to jump on with you, man. I know we've never actually done something like this together. And kind of when everything happened last week, my wife was like, man, like, we should talk to JT. I know it's been something that's burning your heart for race and
Yeah,
reconciliation is something that's burning your heart for so many years.
yeah,
And so my wife actually, every live I've done, man, from Todd White, Lou, we've had Chandler Moore, Chris Kiala, so many amazing people. You're jumping on. I've always has my wife prepares questions. My wife is on right now, but I always have her prepare questions because I feel like she's really good at thinking through things to ask. So I wanted just to jump in, man, with some of the things that she
awesome.
wrote down here. Awesome, man. One of the things she put here is, what are your thoughts and feelings regarding social injustice and racism that you continually see? As a black man, what has it been like? Because I even think you were the one that you moved. Was it to Ferguson, right?
Yeah,
When
yeah,
everything happened, I mean, you're not just someone that you talk about it when the situation happens. You you're living. You're kind of living this message that you're preaching. So what has it been like continually seeing injustice, racism, things like that? First off and foremost, just on a national level, we'll put aside the church aspect right now.
yeah.
Just on a national level, what has it been like for you, and what have you observed?
Oh man, there are tears, bro. Um, for me, it started, I think, with a question that I think every black person and possibly every person who comes from like a historically oppressed people
Yeah.
group have asked the why question. At some point there's been why. And for me, I asked that question when I was 12 years old, bro. I snuck, when you're a kid, like you find ways to
Yeah.
disobey your parents.
Yeah.
So I wasn't like allowed to watch rated R movies, but somehow I guess I went to my cousin's house or something. We found a way to watch a movie called Mississippi Burning. And it
Oh,
was,
wow.
it was like the horror story of the Deep South and the oppression of the Deep South and the Klan and the Jim Crow era in America, which my dad grew up in. He was, as a teenager, he was a senior in high school when they finally signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which allowed schools to be integrated. So he
Wow.
never knew an integrated America as a teen. The first 2 decades of his life, that was unheard of. And so to watch that movie and go, wow, this is what my dad and what my mom and what my grandparents and the further back you go in history, the worse it gets, for our people. So I got gripped with depression at 12 years old, bro, like a deep mourning over the race issue and over the injustices. And in many ways, I've gone through various processes of grief with it, and also various processes of healing, like, uh, but the tears have never left. And so for me, this new round, as tragic as it is, I've kind of
Oh, but
been
then
at
you broke up a little bit.
yeah, I was going to say this additional round with the latest shooting, it hasn't changed my kind of constant burden that I've carried over this issue over the years. If anything, I'm mourning now over those who are in mourning for the first time. You know, I'm mourning over the reality that this is something that we've yet to engage at in a way that where we're seeing massive healing, and that's really what needs to happen.
What do you feel like, this question came to me right now, what do you feel like the root of racism, if you were to boil down all the, I mean, there's so many things that are intertwined, so much fruit of racism. What is the root that you feel like, man, if we can just cut this thing, you would see so much shift? What would you say, in your opinion, is the root of racism in our country?
I would say in the globe, the root is hatred for what Jesus looks like in the skin of a person, of their ethnicity, or of their culture. Like racism is, I hate what Jesus looks like in you, because we're created in the image of God. That's called the Imago Dei. And so he's put, it's like an artist, a great painter, there's photos behind you. A great artist will distinguish themselves by their artistic style, and everything they create has their signature on it. And so God creates the nations of the earth, and he puts his unique signature and his unique stamp in every single people and every person, in the way they sound, the way they move, the way they dance, the way they dress, their histories, and it all has the stamp of his artistic, of his image. And so when you say, I hate these people, I hate the Hispanic community, I hate blacks, I hate that. When you say that, Jesus even told the disciples, he says, when they reject you, understand it's not me, they're rejecting, it's me. And so the rejection of a culture is the rejection of Christ, man. And so we got to deal with the issue of knowing God. Like that's the foundation. But secondly, the foundation in America is that we built a nation on the premise that people who bear God's image are not people at all. We said that that it was actually in 1857, the U.S. Supreme Court said black people were not people at all, that we've been sold all across the world, and that the Declaration of Independence was not written for us because it was written for humans and we're animals. And so when that's in the soil of a nation, it takes more than just the civil rights movement to uproot that. You know, it takes generations to undo the violation of God's image that's been done through the law and through the systems.
You know, I heard this interesting quote. I don't know if it was from Circuit Riders. They were, they quoted, I think, John Gray. That might have been it. And they said the most important conversation that needs to happen right now isn't black to black, it's white to black, it's white to white, on the issue of racism, where they're able to, I guess, come to grips. I mean, what do you think? Like, how do you get around the table and talk about this topic? Because personally, for me, I've never even had a discussion of race. I'm kind of in a weird situation. I'm Hispanic, but I'm very American. So when I came to LA, I was looked at as weird. I didn't know Spanish. I very much love the culture. I've always felt like this oddball, just like not understanding my own culture. I remember the first time my wife was traveling to Hispanic churches, and I told her, "Hey, I can't wait to support you and your people." And she goes, "My people?" What? She goes, "You're brown too." And I'm like, "I am." You know?
Oh yeah.
I never connected. What important conversations do you think that races need to have with one another to begin? Like you said, I never thought about that. In the soil of our country is the foundation that we were built on the backs of slaves, and we were built, I mean, in essence, on these ideologies of certain nationalities don't have certain privileges. So what conversations need to happen, and with whom they need to happen with?
Well, I think the first thing is we have to understand, first of all, we have to dismantle the thought that it's only white people. Because the bottom line is, the reality is, guys, all of us. So the history of slavery, if you are in America and you are an American, whether you're a Hispanic American, an Asian American, if you live in America, then you live on the land and the land is defiled, like the land is corrupted, which means you have inherited all of American history. It's your history. So Black history is your history. Brian Barcelona's history. Black
Wow.
history is American history, which means we're all living in what was built before us, and systems that are still in motion from our foremothers and forefathers. We've inherited their sins, like we've inherited
Wow.
their ideologies, and that means every single one of us at some level are wounded by it, even if we don't understand. Every single one of us have been trained in certain ways of engaging in culture today that is processed through the lens of what our foremothers and forefathers thought about the other, meaning, the Black person, the white person, or whatever. And so we all are dealing with like this trauma, and we all got to have honest conversations, and we all have to honestly humble ourselves. But I would say, man, that as believers, like I can talk about what I think white people should talk about, but I'm not white. So I can say, here's what I know as a believer we should talk about.
It's good.
We should talk about the fact that Jesus has redeemed for himself a people out of every tribe, tongue, and nation, which means that like this gospel is a race. It's about like ethnicities. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like you cannot engage the gospel without engaging in conversations about ethnicity,
Good.
because it's all about like the nations of the earth, the
Good.
ethnic groups of the earth, and the cultures. You know what I'm saying? So we can have these conversations from that standpoint and say that, dude, if we don't love
So
the
good.
way Jesus loves, if we don't see the way Jesus sees, then we can't see Jesus. And if you can't see Jesus, then whatever Jesus you're worshiping is not Jesus at all. So like we gotta go there, man. And we have to be willing to be challenged. We got to be willing to come to the table, man. Get offended if it's offensive to you, but you can't stay offended. Be willing to have the conversation with somebody who's offended with you. Be willing to let the person talk to you and confront your offense. But the thing that we can't do is cancel. We can't cancel each other, man, because we're in this thing. And I believe that our generation, the millennial generation, the Gen Z generation, we're the hope. Like we have to go with it, and we can't ignore it.
So good. You're so right, man. Racism is not just white people. I'll be honest. In my family, I'm Hispanic, and it was looked down on if one of my cousins dated a Black man. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And that's and you don't think that racism a lot of times is in that, but you'd have kind of my grandma and grandpa, and it's so funny because all of my aunts married all other nationalities. My aunt married a Black man, mother married a Filipino.
And it was
Everybody's
cool,
married.
right?
Yeah, well, they all married Hispanics, and then all the Hispanics were abusive, so they all went to other races. It's
Oh,
terrible.
wow. Wow.
Almost everyone in my family has been divorced, and most of them originally married Hispanics and had terrible experiences, and they just went other ways. But I could see that, man, even growing up, how even that's underlined in you very, very lightly. I'm pretty sure in the African American culture too, you'd find racism with other races. I don't. It's interesting because
Well,
I feel like no one talks about that.
one of the things, one of the distinctions is racism is the violation of the image of God within man, as it's like contained within or empowered by a system, like by laws. So you take a thought process, or what we might call an ideology, and then you put power to it by like validating it through the law and making it a way of life in the land. So so you got to have power to have a system of racism, but at the same time, you have to understand that everyone, and I think what you're hitting on is tribalism. Like we're all tribal. I mean, right now I got on a St. Louis Cardinals hat. Go Cards, even though they probably won't have a season this year. But I mean, so like we can be tribal and be divided by our tribalism. It's like, well, if we're not divided by race or ethnicity, let's divide over Lakers versus Oklahoma or whatever it is. Like we'll find things to get tribal about and let that dictate our division between one another. You know what I'm saying? And so we have tribalism within the cultures that then empower
Wow.
stereotypes about people who are a part of a different tribe. So it's like,
Wow.
oh, if you're a Bulls fan and I'm a Lakers fan, oh snap, you know, we will legitimately, we can let it go to the extreme to where we start talking about them like they're a totally different class of human. You know what I'm saying? And
It's
so we do
true.
that. We do that with ethnicity, bro. We do that.
Niners and Raiders for the West Coast.
There we go. I before I lived in St. Louis, I was in Indianapolis, and so it was Colts Patriots, Manning versus Brady. It's like, yo, I mean, we could be united. We might hate each other over ethnicity until we get into the stadium, and then we unite under a different tribe, and we're the Colts tribe, and we all hate the Patriots and talk to them like we're the Klan, you know, up against black. I'm serious, you know. That sounds
Yeah.
crazy. So what is it in human nature, you know what I'm saying, that makes us so easily pledge allegiance to a temporal thing versus a king, you know, who created and died for every people? And
Wow.
that's where we have to go, man.
Yeah. So good. Now it was interesting this last kind of situation that happened. I really seen a rise up from the church, from pastors, from leaders, and what should be the response. Like, how important is it to address race? Because when I got saved, I didn't really know too much of the race issue in the church because I got saved in a multicultural church. Like, our church had everybody. It was a 2,000 member church. They had flags of all the nations. They did cultural honoring of different national. I mean, that's the kind of church I got saved, as an Assemblies of God church, amazing church. And I didn't know that even within the church there's divides. And then I start traveling and I start preaching, and I
Right.
realize, wow, this is a Hispanic church, and this is a
Yeah.
Korean. I'm not saying that those are bad things in any way,
Sure.
but how important is it for the church now to respond? And what would the response be to division, to racism, to separation as nationalities, like in our country?
Well, the first thing is we can't just respond to reactions. We have to respond to the root.
Wow.
So everybody has an initial reaction. And what the church does is go, dude, the culture is going nuts. Man, everybody's talking about race. I got to take a stand. Let me take a stand so I don't look like a racist. Let me take a stand so that I'm not being accused of being silent. No, 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 no. We can't just respond to reactions, and we can't just react. Reactions are okay. Everybody has an initial reaction. But from there, we have to go, okay, what is God after? And
It's
what is
good.
our responsibility? And the bottom line
It's
is
good.
Micah 6:8 says, act justly, walk humbly, and love mercy. So act justly means that, first of all, we do justice. It's one thing we can easily post, we can easily protest, take to the streets and demand justice. But how can you expect a culture that doesn't know Christ, who is justice himself? Isaiah 42 says, behold my servant Jesus, he will accomplish justice in the nations, in the ethnic groups. So this is who Jesus is. We are the messengers of justice because that is who he is and how he's coming back. In the book of Revelation, it says he is going to literally, in Revelation 19, it says, in righteousness, he judges and makes war. In other words, he is going to settle the disputes that we've never been able to settle throughout history, man. You know,
Wow.
he's going to, I mean, like in Isaiah 9, it says all the nations, it says he's going to take the things that we've fought each other's with, like our weapons, and he's going to turn them into plowshares, or like things that we use, like instruments that we use for the harvest. And so it's like, yo, if Jesus is coming and the foundation of his throne is righteousness, meaning right thinking, with justice, that's the way he leads. He thinks right, he does everything right, and he leads and makes right decisions that impact the culture in a right way. That's what justice is, making right the wrong things. Then we are the people of justice today and tomorrow. And we so what we do is we help people understand the redemption. Like, how is God going to turn all of our tears and all of our pain into something glorious? You know, He takes the worst parts of our life and our culture and our experiences, and he turns them into tools that bring him greater glory. So we have to be the messengers of good news, which is, even in the midst of this, God is good and he has a plan for us.
So good.
Secondly, we have to understand that our war is not against flesh and blood, even though if we just look at like the news and listen to how everybody feels, we can easily say, well, the white people need to do this. Trust me, yes, white folks, y'all need to get yourself together. You know what I'm saying? Like, you got to get it together. You got to be willing to go there. But the gospel says no one does what is right.
Wow.
Nobody. So guess what? Black folk, Latino culture, Asian culture, guess what? You got stuff to get together too. We got to get it together. And so the humility is like, wow, Lord, help me in my response. Help me not to get bitter. Help me not to get angry. And then we have to do Isaiah 58. Isaiah 58, man, is the fast that looses the bondage of oppression, and the fast that actually wins the day over injustice, man. And that fast is a whole bunch of very practical things. It's not just a prayer meeting. Like, we got to pray. But what Isaiah 58 says, it says, do away with the bondage that's in your midst, which is slander and the pointing of the finger. The first thing we have to do is not point our finger at everybody else. We got to point our finger at us. Like, as a black man, I have to go, okay, my dad taught me, if I don't want to get gunned down, then I've got to live far above everybody's stereotypes of me. I'm angry about people's stereotypes of me. They're not right. That's not cool. But at the end of the day, I understand that, dude, if I want people to value my life, if I want them to see me as like a person and not a beast and a savage in a culture that has treated us as beasts and savages, dude, I gotta live righteous. Like, man, I gotta go. If a white man can get away with going 1 mile, I gotta go 2.
Wow, come on.
If the white man can get away with wearing, shorts and sandals on the stage, I'm coming up there in a suit and tie just to let them know. You know what I'm saying? I'm next level, because if I valued the changing of perceptions that we've inherited through history, that's what I got to do. So Isaiah 58, man.
I have a question that I want to ask you. My wife wrote. Do you have a story where you personally were deeply impacted by racism, or was something that you felt from people? Maybe it was a church you went to, or a situation where you were young. I know you spoke about your father, which I want to actually hear a little bit more about your pops, man, because I know you and Matt Lockett have done some things together, and so I know there's been which I want to hit on too, just so much. But for you personally, like, have you ever gone through something like that in your lifespan where you have felt second class, you have felt put down, you have felt judged just because of how you look, the color of your skin, where you were at, what you wore?
Yeah, somebody asked me that on another interview recently, and it's so hard to answer, because not to sound like, I mean, it's just truth. The reality is it's such a normal part of my existence, especially growing up. I know you're in LA and people are watching from all over the place, but, depending on what part of the country you grew up in, that will radically inform your personal experiences with racism. But I grew up in the Deep South, man. I grew up in North Carolina, in rural North Carolina. I was the only black guy in most of my classes. I was a part of the academically gifted classes growing up, because my dad, again, because of the culture he grew up in, he like demanded, like, bro, you're going to be the best, so I was the only black guy in my classes. And we had one, you might find this shocking, we had one Mexican, and his name was Raphael, and he was an exchange student. And so where I grew up, it was just black and white. And in my classes, I was the guinea pig. My earliest memory, this is crazy, but my earliest memory was being in preschool. My mom would drop me off, and we'd sit on the carpet, and they would serve us oatmeal as the first thing every morning. And I remember some kids licking me, bro. They licked me. And I'm like, why are these kids licking me? And the teacher comes in, sees all the kids like sucking on my skin and licking me. I know it sounds crazy. And she's like, stop. And she pulls the kids away. And one of the kids said, chocolate, chocolate.
Oh my
They
gosh.
thought I was chocolate. This is my
Oh my
earliest. I was
gosh.
like 4 years old. You know, it marked me because I can remember it at 4. But at that moment, I go, oh, I'm chocolate. So I started sucking on my skin, and I developed a bruise on my skin from sucking my hand.
Wow.
And my mom, I remember, eventually was like lamenting over this sore on my skin. And I said to her, chocolate. And she goes, oh, he thinks he's chocolate. Oh my gosh, where did that come from? You know, and
Wow.
it so that was my entrance into an awareness that I was different, that, oh my gosh, like, and so growing up in the academically gifted classes in the most formational parts of my life, dude, like at first, you know, if I'm hanging around white people all day and they're listening to, at that time, it was like alternative rock, Green Day and Nirvana and all that stuff was
Green
like
Day.
super, I know, that's how old it is. But at that time, if that's what they're listening to, that's what I'm listening to. So I was too white for the black folk, because I get around my brothers and they be like, yo, man, you ain't black, you are Oreo. You black on the outside and white on the inside. And so I would try to act dumb, and I would change my dress and my fashion to try to be accepted by the black community.
Wow.
But I'm too white for the black community. And then I I find out that my friends, my white friends, are getting together at each other's homes, and I never got invited to anybody's home, never got invited to anybody's vacations. And I finally asked one of my friends, I said, dude, you guys just went to the beach, had this awesome beach trip. This is the 3rd year in a row. Why didn't I get to go? And he says, well, bro, I knew you were going to ask me one day. But he says, unfortunately, my grandparents go to the beach on every annual beach trip, and they refuse to sleep in the house with a black man. And bro, I was crushed. And I said, oh, so I'm too white for the black people, and I'm too black for the white people. Who am I? Where do I fit? And so that was one of the most formational race, crises of my youth. And I could go for days with encounters I've had with the police, with assumptions that have been made, with,
Give me one story of maybe you encountered a police officer, and I
bro,
mean,
I had my first car, dude. My first car was a old vintage BMW. Dude, I wish I'd never sold it now, because that thing would be pretty dope.
where somebody, yeah.
Yeah. But bro, I had this old BMW, and there was another black guy in our town who had one very similar to it. And he stole some shoes from like a local shoe store. And I was on my way home from work. Ironically, I worked at a shoe store. So I'm on my way home from work, and suddenly I get surrounded, like the blue lights behind me. I pull over, and then like 8 police cars surround me on all sides, guns drawn.
What was going on in your mind? What was going on in your heart when you seen that? Like when you seen 8 cars roll that deep?
Bro, I'm like, what the? I don't know. It happened so fast. I'm just like, what is going on? I'm 16 years old, driving home from school, from my little part-time job. And they're demanding, with guns drawn, they're demanding that I get out of the car. And so I like open the door, hands up, hands up. So I got hands up. They come, they grab me, they put me in handcuffs, and they're like, I'm like, what did I do? What did I do? And they said, be quiet, Kelly, be quiet. And I'm like, Kelly, that is not my name. That is not my name. Yes, it is. We know who you are. They didn't check my ID. They're like, I mean, it's nuts. I didn't get beat up, but I mean, you would have thought even after I was in handcuffs, the guns are still drawn, and they wouldn't even check to see if I was the right guy. My dad, who the whole town, small town, North Carolina, but the whole town knew my dad, because he basically, he went to the chief of police. I don't know what he said, but let's just say for a few months, people were apologizing. I mean, the mayor called, we're sorry. I guess they didn't want any lawsuits, but it was just the assumption that I was this other black guy. And being in a situation where if one black guy does one thing, it literally sets the stage and the perception of all black people. So like, one guy does something and now I'm guilty just by the color of the skin and my build. So when I see, the news report and you hear about some horrible crime that happened, half the time I'm like, God, please don't let it be a black guy. Don't let it be a black guy. And sure enough, mugshot pops up and it's a black guy. And I'm like, dude, he just set the whole race back. He said, I got to move different because of how he moved, because now I'm guilty until proven innocent just by association of race and color.
Let me ask you this. Did you ever develop anger towards law enforcement? Was there ever fear towards law? Because it's interesting. I have two uncles that are police officers, and one's Filipino, one's black. My black uncle just retired, and now he's the Sacramento Kings security. He's dope, man. He's friends. He's the personal bodyguard for Jerry Rice. Jerry Rice's best friend from the Niners.
Yeah,
amazing. But it's cool because I've gotten to hear his perspective of what it's like to be a police officer.
Yeah.
And be put in situations, because there's always two sides of stories.
Sure.
But then also there is legitimate police brutality. How was your heart or view of law enforcement affected by the situations you've gone through?
I think, my view of law enforcement, honestly, from that incident, I was shook, but I didn't have fear. And I wasn't in a place of like, all police are bad. Mainly because the whole environment and culture of my hometown from a systemic level, I think when you grow up, if you grow up drinking contaminated water, you don't know it's contaminated until you get pure water. So it's like, I just knew like, this is the way it is. The police are crazy. The politicians are corrupt. These are Southern aristocratic, like sons and daughters of plantations owners. And my dad, having grown up in that environment, he's like, you got to watch your back. You got to know how to move. So I didn't think about it. It was just like survival, kind of like street life in any hood or whatever. It's just like, you don't hit that block, you don't move that way, you're good, But it wasn't until we moved here to Ferguson, and Ferguson exploded because of the 18-year-old Mike Brown who was shot by police, where the national conversation, Ferguson tipped us into a national conversation on police brutality, man. And all of a sudden, after Ferguson, when suddenly black men were getting shot, like on sight almost, it seemed like, when they get pulled over, you didn't know if you were going to come out of a police stop. I got stopped twice after Ferguson. So in the last 5 years, I've been stopped twice. And both times I had to literally fight a spirit of fear. I've never felt fear like I felt in those moments, because I'm going, I have no idea how traumatized the police are. So from my perspective, I was like, if police deal with, we have to be honest as a culture. We have to be honest. We can't have this conversation and avoid the hard portions. And the hard truth is that probably 60 to 75% of the people that police officers come in contact with every day, they actually are making a living in the underground economy. I can go right now and I can walk half a mile away from my house and find a drug dealer, and he will be black. Now, black people aren't the only drug dealers, but I'm just trying to say that, like, yeah. I know where to go to get illegal guns, to get illegal drugs. And most of them look like me in this community, which means who the police are dealing with in this community, 60 to 75% of the people they come across every day really don't like the police and don't want to have anything to do with them and would rather the police officer be dead. That's just how it is because of the nature of how they move. But the problem is that causes post-traumatic stress in the officer to the point that after a while, he starts to loop me in with those people, even though I don't move, I don't get down like that. So I'm not trying to give them a pass. That doesn't make it okay. What it means is the police officers need healing. And what it also means is our community and the dudes who look like me, as a minister, I have a responsibility to lead them to Jesus and lead them out of a lifestyle that is in opposition to God's design for their life, and therefore is in opposition to the law, which then makes it more dangerous for me, the innocent black guy. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I know that was a lot. That was a
No,
lot.
that's
So,
good, man. I feel like you offer kind of both perspectives, because you always, you always yeah, like my uncle was saying once, I was like, what is it like, you're a police officer in this times? And he goes, Brian, he goes, 1 minute I'm a hero, the next minute I'm a villain. And he goes, people don't understand the split decisions that we need to make sometimes, and sometimes we make the wrong ones.
bro, and that's, that's common ground. Not to cut you off, but that's where we find common ground. 1 minute the officer is a hero, the next minute he's a villain. 1 minute the whole nation is mourning the loss of Kobe Bryant because he's a hero, and the next minute the whole nation is mourning the loss of another young black man who died because he was treated as a villain. We are the most loved and the most hated culture in the earth. And so that's where we are. And that's where the police officer and the civilian, the white man and the black man, that's where we find common ground. And we cannot find that common ground by shaming one another into feeling something if we don't feel. We have to say, God, help us to feel and help us to see the way you see.
Yeah, I got pulled over, I think, a month ago. Rightfully so. I was on my phone in a Home Depot parking lot. I was just trying to put on some music, and a cop pulls me over because he sees me on the phone. And I've learned, man, I having uncles that are police officers, naturally I want to honor, but he came up just real hard, and obviously, I was in a Tahoe, some tinted windows on it, and he just comes hard and, give me your lie. I'm like, what did I do? And I'm just like, you're right, officer. Like, I honor you. Like, you're right. And I think even through that, I'm not saying every case is going to be that, but even through that humility of understanding, he's probably just as hostile coming up to a Chevy Tahoe with tinted windows. And
Yeah.
and you know what I mean? I got some tattoos on my arms. He's probably encountered people in that very same vehicle with tattoos on their arms, very different. They're not a Christian like me. They're not going to honor him like me.
Most def.
And so I think, man, I think that conversation is two ways, because I think people do forget what it's like to be in the, again, not justifying injustice, but man, understanding just like you can't throw all black people, all Hispanics, all Asians in one basket. You can't do that with police officers either.
You can't, man. And there are police, but we also can't ignore there are police officers who are supremacists. There are administrations that are legacy administrations and legacy municipalities from the Jim Crow era, from the antebellum era. These things are real. They do exist. And when a black person cries racism or pulls that out, or what we would call the race card, it is not always racism, but there is enough historical fact that it's almost like what we say within the Me Too movement and what we say to a woman who says they've been raped. Just because they say they've been raped doesn't mean they actually were raped. But we should always believe them first. We should always believe them first. And so if a black person goes, this was racism, there's enough of the historical record to say, yeah, there's a very, very strong chance that it was. But now we don't just need to roll our eyes and assume, there they go. There they go with that racism stuff again. No. There is enough of a historical and sociological and cultural record to say, yeah, it might be. Now, let's do the hard work of getting to the facts and let's see if we can find and prove why it wasn't, instead of let's deny it. Like let's go there and give the dignity that we would give to a woman who was raped, the dignity of being believed, and then let's examine the facts, and if the facts present a different truth, then let's not deny it. Let's embrace it, Let's embrace the truth.
And that's, I think, what's hard is there is some situations where the first cry is racism, and then you kind of dig deeper into the story.
Yeah.
And and then I feel like me and my wife have this conversation. Me and my wife have this thing. She's on right now. Marcella's on right now, so she's watching. But there's this thing even in our marriage where we'll have disagreements. And every time I tell her, okay, if we're in an argument over something, and then I present truth,
Yeah.
you have a choice whether you're going to completely step away from your frustration, and vice versa. Me too.
Right.
I'm going to step away from my frustration because I have truth now. And I feel like that's what's difficult, or even stuff that's been called racism, when truth and facts are presented that it's not, you don't really see the media report that side. You don't really see the people come out and say, hey, you know what? This situation totally looked like this, but in reality it wasn't. I'm so sorry. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and that's where we as a nation have never gone. You know, there's a difference between facts and truth. And so some people armed with facts, they just hit the facts. But facts can't set you free. Like truth sets you free, you know? And so as a nation, we have never entered into a corporate fact finding over the wounds of history and what the systems of oppression and injustice in the past, how those things have been perpetuated in our present. And so Nelson Mandela, after South Africa had been divided and there was wars and civil war and all this injustice between white South Africans called Afrikaans people and black South Africans, Nelson Mandela ascends to the presidency and he says, the first thing we're going to do is establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, like a forum where we're going to create a committee in the federal government whose whole job is to create a way for us to find out and examine and hear the stories of all the tragedies that happened under apartheid. And what we're going to do is provide them with a way to be healed by coming to Congress and testifying before us. Tell your testimony. It's basically like share your testimony. And you could actually meet with the person who murdered your kid in that testimony. You could say whatever you wanted to say to them. But the thing is, after it was recorded on the congressional testimony, that was it. Like, it had to stay there. And there was a measure of healing that came to South Africa. Now, there's criticisms of it, and there's still a lot of work to be done. But we as America, we had the Civil War, we had a civil rights movement, but we actually have never healed. We have never had the national conversation. We've had holidays where we celebrate Dr. King and monuments and marches and all these different things. But I believe it's up to us as believers to say, you know what, we are going to build. Martin Luther King said, I have a dream where one day the sons of slaves and the sons of slave owners sit together at the table of brotherhood. Well, what's the table of brotherhood? The table of brotherhood is the household of faith where God is the Father and he creates a table in the presence of our enemies for us to come and sit down with our enemies and say, you know what? Let's talk about what you did to me. Let's talk about what I did to you, and let's get it all out. And God, what if God began to heal our nation at the table of brotherhood? We have to create the table, man.
So good. You know, I've never brought this up publicly. It's not something I talk about. I don't get too much into politics. But we're living in a very interesting time where you even said this to me, I think when we were in Virginia together, there is a divide. You go to one church and they call Obama the savior. You go to another church, they call Trump the savior. You go to one church, they call Trump a racist. You go to one church, you know what I mean? There's so much divide in this administration. Beyond what media reports, what have you observed? What good have you found in the administration of working with people of color? Because honestly, I've just tuned out news as it's so biased. You go to Fox, you're going to get a very heavy side on Fox. You go to CNN, you're going to get a heavy side on CNN. I know this is not a topic I really speak on, but I would love to hear your perspective of what obviously you can see the bad that's been portrayed on media. What good has come, in your opinion, from the administration, if any, that you would say in these last kind of 4 years that we've had President Trump?
Well, I'll say this, man, two things before, as I answer that. First of all, we have to, Christians, especially conservatives, always say, well, all authority comes from God. We got to honor the authorities. Here's my deal. And people are like, we got to pray for President Trump. And my challenge to anybody that's their first response is, if all authority came from God and you're pro-Trump, will you agree that the authority that Obama had came from God?
Wow.
2, if we have to pray for Trump, did you pray for Obama?
Wow.
You know, so I'm like, okay, we gotta balance our theology and understand that whatever the standard is for one, we're all being weighed on the same scales. And so my position is, yes, God set Obama in the office. Yes, God set Trump in office. God did it. Now, God did it in partnership with us by allowing men, or mankind. When I say men, I'm talking ladies, women, whatever. But he allowed us to choose the leader that most reflected our hearts. So I believe Obama was the personification of the extreme of what was in the heart of liberals and of minority cultures.
Yeah.
Then Trump represents the extreme of what was in the heart of majority culture and conservatives. And so God just gave America, over the course
What it
of
wanted.
what he gave us, the leader we deserve. He gave us the heart. He gave us the leader that looks like our hearts. And when we look at both leaders and their policies, we can look at policies that Obama signed into legislation that increase wickedness in the world. We can see it if you weigh it on biblical scales. But we can also look at him and go, wow, that dude was dope. I mean, look, he had, like, you know,
I just
Kobe in
watched
the.
I just watched Michelle Obama's documentary yesterday because I told my wife, like, I want a different perspective because I hear a one side
Yeah,
perspective of Obama, but I want to see, and when I watched it, I'm like, man, like I would have totally had dinner with these people, like, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Like,
I mean, you look at it and you go like, wow. Can you imagine the amount of healing it brought to a generation who used to get lynched, who are alive today, who would get killed if they even made eye contact with a white person from the other side of the street? To suddenly see somebody who has their skin color in the highest position in the land is
yeah,
like, yo, wow. So God used it as a double-edged sword of healing and judgment on our nation. In the same way, God is using Trump as a double-edged sword of healing and judgment on our nation.
wow,
There are policies and things that he's doing that are incredible for our country.
yeah.
Things that have never been done. I personally have been to the White House. Well, that's ridiculous. I've been to the White House. I've never been, I'm like, I never imagined I would have an opportunity to go. And it's not because I'm like some like Trump guy. No, it's because they are actively, his administration is actively looking to engage A, church leaders, and B, engage Black or African American voices. And they're giving us unprecedented access to the table. And now, like our guy John Gray, he went and caught
Flat,
some major flack for going.
which to
But I'm
me
going,
is ridiculous. Like,
it's like,
come on,
yo,
like,
yeah, I'm like, dude, how do you impact the heart of the king if you're not at the king's table? So we're in a culture of activism, strong and heavy opinions, but do we have the moral fortitude and clarity and temperance to even come to the table, even if you disagree? Now, when I went to the White House, bro, there were other Black people in there that were trying to turn the White House visit into a pro-Trump rally. I didn't go for a rally. I went to try to see if we could get some things done. You know what I'm saying? I'm not coming as a fanboy. I'm not coming as a participant. I'm coming as a prophet. We need the voice of the Lord, you know? And so if they're looking for leadership and opening the door to hear the voice, if I might have some measure of ability to represent the heart of the country and represent my people group and represent the healing that needs to take place, man, I'm coming to the table. And what I love about this administration is that God has set people around Trump who love God, who understand God's agenda and God's heart, and who are making room for voices to be heard if you respond to the invitation. I do
So good.
believe that Trump's a white billionaire in his 70s. So do I expect him to have core cultural competency or an ability to empathize or even articulate the core concerns of the Black community or the Hispanic community? Absolutely not. I mean, the white 70-year-old billionaire was the type of person who enslaved my people for generations. So I'm like, how can I expect him to be the most, like, open and loving and gonna say stuff right? I can't. But what I can do is expect a seat at the table, and that's what this administration has provided. I've been on three phone calls with the White House since the visit in the COVID era. So
it's interesting because this phrase comes to me that you don't do much with marches, you do more with meetings. And I feel like you said, I think people have associated conversation or even a what is it, like they would associate disagreement as hatred or conversation as absolute agreement. Where again, man, when Obama was president, I did pray for him. Did I agree with every policy he passed? Absolutely not.
right.
You know what I mean? Is there things that President Trump has done that obviously as a person of faith, you're like, man, like as a moral standard and biblical perspective, that's something that you agree with? Absolutely. But it just personality a little bit crazy. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I love, man, I love what Lou said one time. He says, he says, everyone wants to judge our politicians and leaders. He goes, you got Wikipedia and all these things. He goes, but what if the Lord pulled the Wikipedia of your life? And
Right.
what if
There
the
we
Lord
go.
pulled the Wikipedia of the church? And so I feel like, yeah, even in this, crazy tension, I stay away from political conversations. I've always kept
Yeah,
the
I do
main
too.
thing, the main thing. But I do think we can argue that when, whether it was the Obama era or the Trump era, you do see God uses everything for the good of those who love him. And I love what this one pastor,
There we
Sammy
go.
Rodriguez, says, that it's not the elephant, it's not the donkey, it's the lamb. And I
There we
think
go.
we forget that as believers. We forget our ability, as Ravenhill says, man, it's not the White House, the answer's found in God's house.
That's it.
And so if we're divided politically, how do we ever expect the world to have an example or even these kind of conversations? I think these need to be more normal. You know what I miss about the Obama era? I could sit with someone who was for Obama and sit with someone who wasn't, and you could actually talk. And
Yeah.
I love that. You could have a conversation. Oh, I disagree with this. Nowadays, man, everybody's so hostile and crazy.
Yeah. Everybody's offended. And that's where the demonic stronghold, that's where Satan has a heyday, because everybody responds out of their offense. And because of things like this, IG, Facebook, we have more avenues to air our offenses and to try to get people to adopt our offense.
Wow.
Well, you know what? Here's the thing. No. I'm not going to, I cannot cause you to adopt even my burden, because the burden I'm carrying is coming from the Lord. And so more people are dealing, this anger and offense turns into depression and anxiety and suicidal thoughts and all these other things. There were activists here in Ferguson in the original kind of Black Lives Matter emergence that didn't make it through because the burden and the weight of their anger actually drove them into like mental health issues. And the bottom line is, we can get so caught up in our mental, in our anger, in our politics, our partisanship, and that's idolatry. When you pledge your allegiance to a political party above the kingdom of God, and when you're so caught up in the facts or the disinformation campaigns and all these different things, that you're not being washed in truth and in peace and in love and in mercy. And then what happens, man, is the bitterness and the anger will turn into darkness and depression. But Jesus says, my yoke is easy, my burden is light.
Yeah.
So, like, I'm not more burdened right now than I've ever been over the issue. I'm heartbroken and I've been broken. And Jesus says, upon this one I will look, he who is of a broken and a contrite spirit. they will not be denied. If we're crying tears and we're in mourning, then we're in a healthy place, because the Bible says, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. We're not supposed to stay in this perpetual state of like anger and rage. It has to move us to the point of tears, but to the point of like holy tears, where we're crying and feeling what God feels. And
So
then it
good.
says, Jesus with tears looked upon the crowd who was beaten and harassed, and he looked at them and he had compassion on them. So our anger has to move us into mourning, and our mourning has to move us into compassion, and then our compassion moves us into action. Jesus moved with compassion, stepped out, and he healed everyone who was sick. I think this is a setup for the greatest healing our nation has ever seen. I believe that what started where you are in LA with the Azusa Street revival, where the
Yeah.
miracle was that the
One-eyed black man.
yeah, the color line was washed away in the blood of Jesus.
Come on.
I believe God's going to do Azusa Street Volume 2, and we're
So
going to
good.
not just get healed from like, you know, physical illnesses,
So good.
but God's going to deliver us from the trauma in our minds because of racial
So good.
and systemic oppression.
So good. Well, man, will you just pray us out? We got about 1 minute before this will cut out. Will you just pray that we're gonna we're gonna cut this, edit it, put it on YouTube? Would you just pray that those who maybe they've been burdened in this season to carry this message, or they've been offended, that man, God would equally work in both. Maybe just in the next 30 seconds, 45 seconds, you can just pray for people that are on with us.
Father, I pray for the grace and the glory of new mercy. Your mercies are new every morning. God, you said in Psalm that those who sow in tears will reap in joy. God, would you release a song of deliverance and a shout of joy out of those who are weeping? God, we thank you for causing justice to roll down like mighty waters and righteousness like a mighty stream.
Yeah.
And we join our tears with the tears of heaven, and we thank you for the glory that is to come in Jesus' name.
Amen. JT, love you so much, man.
Love you too, man.
I look forward to when they lift all this craziness, man, we get together again.
Let's do it.
So, all right, man, you take care.
All right, man. Blessings.
Bye.